I mean, look at this. Look at it! A world built on fantasy. Synthetic emotions in the form of pills. Psychological warfare in the form of advertising. Mind-altering chemicals in the form of food. Brainwashing seminars in the form of media. Controlled, isolated bubbles in the form of social networks. Real? You want to talk about reality? We haven't lived in anything remotely close to it since the turn of the century. We turned it off, took out the batteries, snacked on a bag of GMOs while we tossed the remnants in the ever-expanding dumpster of the human condition. We live in branded houses, trademarked by corporations, built on bipolar numbers, jumping up and down on digital displays, hypnotizing us into the biggest slumber mankind has ever seen. You have to dig pretty deep, kiddo, before you can find anything real. We live in a kingdom of bullshit.
Yes, Mr. Robot. We live in a kingdom of bullshit, and that is our reality. Reality bites, and the Aeons are finally biting back here at Aeon Bite. The Gnostic ethos tells us we are in a virtual reality nightmare, not a benign didactic illusion Easterners and New Agers would have us believe, or an organized structure Westerners would have us believe. The red pill comes down hard, and the red suppository goes up cracking. And this you've seen from a clip from Mr. Robot. Yet, the Gnostic ethos also avers that it's only when we realize how bad things are that we can finally do something about it. Finally do some real good for our lacerated souls and the least of our brothers in this kingdom of bullshit. When you realize you woke up in hell, you will be able to remember that dream of heaven you fell from. Oh, you digital Lucifers and punk Icariuses. That is why you have arrived here at the virtual Alexandria. It's no mistake, no coincidence. You sprayed that Ubic spray on your soul's face and now see reality for what it is. And now will assist others by that Gnostic ethos of creating better than the creator gods. And they're butt slaves in the establishment.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain. But you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad.
As the Nag Hammadi Library's authoritative teaching says, we have nothing in this world, lest the archons of the world that have come into being should detain us in the worlds that are in the heavens, those in which universal death exists. And as Paul says in Romans 12, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Hell, I'm going to grant you your greatest wish. I'm going to show you a world without sin.
All this and more happens and ends at Aeon Bite Gnostic Radio. Broadcast always through the God Above God.com. We don't take prisoners but liberate them. We are not the final authority on anything, but hope to be an endless possibility for everything. Divided we stand, together we rise. I like this quote by Philip K. Dick that expresses our sacred and profane quest. It goes, within the armor is the butterfly, and within the butterfly is the signal from another star.
We are star stuff. We are the universe, made manifest, trying to figure itself out.
I am Abraxas, that terrible God above God as the ancients knew him. That name came from a realization, from an ayahuasca vision I had around the same time I started this paint bean factory, originally called Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis. And it happened during that MySpace, PHP forum era, when everyone had a fake name. Now everyone uses their real name on the internets, making it easier for the Archons to soon unleash once and for all a last inquisition that this time will burn the last vestiges of humanity's innocence, individuality, and inventiveness.
Our impulses are being redirected. We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep.
Not if we can stop them. And we will, as we see through this kingdom of bullshit. The Gnostics were said to be negative, but ours is the most positive attitude, since you can now save the screaming light of the pleroma trapped in every animal, rock, or memory. The dream of the alien god becomes manifest. Everyone gets to go home, even the demiurge, perhaps. As Stephen Davis wrote, when the Godhead ceases to know itself, God seems to be human and falls into the multiple personalities we know as human beings. Humankind is fallen God. The goal of Gnostic salvation, then, is to bring self-awareness back to God, which means that divine self-knowledge is the religious goal of human life. That is Gnosis in a nutshell and an angel's nutsack. We continue with that Gnosis. You didn't come here by mistake, nor coincidence.
There are no coincidences, Delia. Only the illusion of coincidence.
On this November, the year of our Demiurge 2015, we have the usual honor of being joined at the virtual Alexandria by Andrew Phillip Smith. Outside of Stephen Heller, Tobias Churton, April DeConnick, and Jeremy Puma, I can't think of anyone who has crystallized and even weaponized the Gnostic philosophy in the last decade, and brought remarkable scholarship, and helped us overcome this kingdom of bullshit.
It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything.
Andrew is certainly doing his Knight of Valis quest this year, releasing a trinity of excellent and recondite Gnostic works. Those are the Gnostic Journal 6, the Lost Teachings of the Cathars, and the Secret History of the Gnostics. 3 works you should read anon before Jehovah and his angelic mafia verhoodle your heavenly awareness now that you've woken up to hell. 3 August books that we will be discussing shortly in this eternal now. Certainly check out Andrew's many other works and check him out at andrewphillipsmith.com. That is Philip with 2 L's. And certainly check out our past interviews with Andrew on so many occult topics that you can find at our YouTube or iTunes channels and our Archive of Past Shows subscription service. And of course check out my book, Voices of Gnosticism, published and edited by Andrew himself at Bardic Press, which also has a catalog of remarkable books. Damning your soul has never been this easy, and riding with Sophia through the tortured heavens has never been so available.
We're not going on our journey to save the world, but to save ourselves.
And in doing that, you save the world. I mean, you do. The influence of a vital person vitalizes. There's no doubt about it. The world is a wasteland. People have the notion of saving the world by shifting it around and changing the rules and so forth. No, any world is a living world if it's alive.
Please support Aeon by Gnostic Radio in any way you can. A few shekels here and there. Join my Patreon campaign. Buy some of my reality-dispanding, mind-expanding books, like, as I mentioned, Voices of Gnosticism, or Stargazer, or The Executioner's Daughter. Subscribe to our archive of past shows. Your continued support keeps this Red Pill cafeteria open. I should mention that I am an Amazon.com affiliate, so any books you order from the GodAboveGod.com grant me a kickback. In fact, if you order anything, whether it's clothes, appliances, or ISIS Christmas ornaments, click through the site first and I will get a kickback from that as well. Even if you don't order anything advertised on the GodAboveGod.com. We're going to build vast futures of light here at the virtual Alexandria. Do so many wonders together. I just know it. I just know it. I will be with you every step of the way as we heed that signal from a star. Much appreciation to you, Mr. Robots, who support this blasphemy on a weekly basis. It was Edward Conzi who said, "The awakening of an individual is a cosmic event." And Abraxas says, "The awakening of an individual is a cosmic rebellion." And here we are.
You have to consider the possibility that God does not like you. He never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. This is not the worst thing that can happen.
It isn't.
We don't need him.
We don't agree.
Fuck damnation, man. Fuck redemption. We are God's unwanted children. So be it.
As for Ellie, our beloved baby, still in the hospital after a second round of surgeries. Her spirit is strong and shining, and her smile comes from the eternal realm itself. She has lived in a dark room with wires feeding her meds for most of her life. Kinda like we do in this kingdom of bullshit, until we wake up. She will come home as you will too. I'll have more updates, or message me if you want to know. But here we are, once again. Welcome to Ellie's room. Welcome to the kingdom of bullshit. Welcome to the desert of the real. Welcome to that cosmic rebellion. And lastly, welcome to more awakening to hell and that dream of heaven. As we go to our interview with my friend, editor, and role model, Andrew Phillip Smith. Hello and goodbye as always.
Is this heaven?
Yeah. If it were, we'd be eating Pop-Tarts with Kim Novak.
Yeah, no kidding. What are you doing out here?
Searching, same as you.
I don't even know what I'm looking for.
These days, they got a name for just about everything. Doesn't matter what they call you. It's the deeds make the man.
Yeah, but my deeds just made things worse. I'm a fraud. I'm a phony. My friends believed in me, but they need some kind of hero.
Then be a hero.
Oh, no. You don't understand. I'm not even supposed to be here.
That's right. You came a long way to find something that isn't out here. Don't you see? It's not about you. It's about them.
But I can't go back.
Don't know that you got a choice, son. No man can walk out on his own story.
This is the Aeon Bide interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined again by Andrew Phillip Smith. And he will be discussing quite a bit of work he's put out this year. The Archons Must Be Shuddering, because we will be discussing 3 great works, and that's The Lost Teachings of the Cathars, The Secret History of the Gnostics, and the long overdue The Gnostic Issue 6. How are you doing today, Andrew?
Hi, Miguel. Well, not too badly. I have a cold, and Dublin is very grey and wet and stormy today. So it's nice to be tucked up with a Skype smartphone talking to somebody from Chicago.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's rainy, dreary, and you're tucked in. That's very Gnostic, and your body is betraying you. So I can't think of a better mood for this discussion. So why don't we start with the Gnostic 6? Again, it's long overdue, and what probably some people want to know is this the end? Is this the swan song?
Yes, well, I'm sure people would like to know that, wouldn't they? I'm not quite sure. I think it is the last regular issue that I'll do. I was thinking of having a special issue, perhaps. Although, given the amount of time that it takes me to get it all together, that would be towards the end of next year. And that issue would. It's just a kind of idea, and I'm not sure if there'd be enough interest in it. But since I've been living in Ireland for the past 8 years or so, I was thinking of focusing on Irish esotericism, and there's not all that much in the way of interest in Gnosticism over here. Although there are a few people, there are esotericists and pagans and all that kind of thing. So I've been toying with the idea of doing a sort of an Irish special of maybe a slightly smaller issue, and I'll see whether all the work that I have to put into it would be worth it for doing that. And then the other idea is, of course, I could do the odd few bits and pieces on the to publish on the web, like a issue 6.5 as a kind of web edition, perhaps.
That's a good idea,
yeah. And I've also thought of coming up with a sequel to the Gnostic, because it is a very kind of particular publication. It's kind of quirky because it has all sorts of articles in it, from actual scholarly, academic level articles to comic strips, to very personal pieces. And I'm quite proud of what I've done with the Gnostic. But it's kind of it's got kind of locked into a particular format and a particular approach. And since I do it as a one-man band, it always takes me so long. And every single time I end up waiting, as editor, I'm waiting for myself as contributor to finish articles that I've been that I half finished and I put aside 6 months ago, and I'm I'm not very good at bullying myself. So I did think of a kind of sequel to the Gnostic, something maybe more focused on esotericism, maybe with a collaborator, so I have somebody who could bully me to get things finished. But again, that wouldn't be something that would appear for a couple of years, really, because I'd have to get all that together. And particularly interested on getting my writing career going again. So who knows? Never say never.
It's a very good issue, and of course, all your issues, I've enjoyed them. I think you definitely should be proud. It's a very great contribution to the world, the esoteric world. I mean, this issue is sort of it's chock full of great thinkers and great writers. You've got Sean Martin, Scott Smith, Jeffrey Kupperman, Bill Darlison, Gary Lachman, and you even have Jeremy Puma coming out of Gnostic retirement to contribute. So it's a great issue.
Yes, I really had to threaten Jeremy. I was going to come around his house and push him around a bit.
Well, Seattle has a lot of rain, so you'd be right at home.
That's not true at all, by the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yes, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the interviews as well. Particularly, we'd had Gary Lachman in an earlier issue interviewed by yourself. So it's nice to be able to talk to him about a couple of his recent projects, and also Warren Kenton, who's often I forget his Kabbalistic name, Zev Ben Shimon Halevi. He was a very charming, 80-something-year-old, I think, or 70-something, whatever, who spoke a bit about his history of getting involved with Kabbalism And he was a very, as I said, charming and personable fellow. And I was glad to have the chance to talk to him. And also Gerard Russell, that was really very interesting, because he was a British diplomat in the Middle East who actually resigned a few years ago because of his kind of disgust at the way that the Afghan elections were being conducted, I think. So he became, when he was in Egypt, he became very interested in the Coptic Christians there, and also in all the other minority religions in the Middle East, you know, so the Mandaeans, Yazidis, Druze, Alawites, and so on. And so he managed to meet most of these people to some degree or other, and he wrote a book, Heirs to Forgotten Kingdoms, which is it's about, I think it's the only book in which each of these ancient minority religions in the Middle East is discussed, because, you know, I've always been quite curious about the Druze and the Alawites and various groups, but the information on them is usually tucked away in quite expensive little scholarly books. So Gerard Russell he's gone out, he's met several of these people and done the research on them as well, and it's a very engaging book that he wrote about them. So, you know, it's fascinating to speak to somebody who's had this first-hand experience with all these people.
I agree, and again, a bunch of very good articles, and none of these are, you might say, a lot of them are not, you might say, just traditional articles. For example, you have an article with, I can't say her last name, Elizaveta, and she discusses her meeting with Rasputin. I've always been very fascinated with Rasputin. I felt he was connected to something deeper, and she definitely supports this. It's an amazing article.
Yes, that's the story of how I came to publish that. It's actually, I published a book called My Dear Father Gurdjieff, which is a book by a son of Gurdjieff, translated from the French. That's the Nicholas de Waal, or Nicholas de Sternval, is the author and the son of Gurdjieff, and that's his mother. So she, she was moving in high society in Russia before the revolution, and she got to meet Rasputin, and it is a fascinating story.
Yeah, he definitely had a lot of insights, and it's amazing how he was able to predict things even as legend states, but he was out there doing it.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Even like how you were able to use some black magic and bring back William James from the dead to write something for you, huh?
Yes. I managed to resurrect William James. It was basically a form of channeling that I used for the article. No, it's actually, in each issue of the Gnostic, I think I've included kind of a reprint of some older material. Everything from Goethe's Platonic myth to the I think in the first issue I had Mark Twain's letters from Lucifer. So I was looking around for something to reprint, and I think Gary Lachman was discussing William James a bit. So he was such an influential writer and researcher and psychologist in the late 19th, early 20th century, that there's his attitude to investigating religious experience and treating that seriously is, I think, coming back into vogue again. So there's a lot to be learned from him.
And it should be mentioned, too, I mentioned some of the other contributors. You've got also, I think I mentioned Sean Martin, but you've got Alex Rivera, you've got Steve D. So you definitely have some also up-and-coming voices in occultism. Yes,
it's nice to be able to include Alex's work, and Steve D., who contributes to, I'm trying to think of the name of the blog.
Blog of Baphomet.
Yeah. He's actually from the Cardiff, Steve D. Yeah, I haven't met him in person yet, but so he would have been a next-door neighbour when I was young. Yes, and Inner Traditions had contacted me if I wanted to include some material by Tobias Chert and and also by Cyrene Alexandrian, who was a surrealist, who's part of the French surrealist circle, and he died a few years ago. And he's written several books on esotericism, some of which are just getting translated into English. But he wrote a book about sort of esoteric attitudes towards sex, which I managed to include this chapter. Very interesting, French esoteric experience with this Sophia, which I hadn't come across before.
While we're talking about Tobias Churton and his new book, Gnostic Mysteries of Sex, and again, he's in the Gnostic 6, and something I wanted to discuss with you that I mentioned is the idea of the sort of Gnostic libertine habits. And again, Tobias is very open to that. I spoke to John Turner, and he seems to be more and more open to that. And in your book, The Lost Teachings of the Cathars, you also talk about that, about how you even say it's possible, even likely, that some of the many sects in the ancient world really did carry out these practices. So do you feel this stuff by the church fathers and all that might not have been wrong, Andrew? That some of the Alexandrian Gnostics were into some sort of sex magic or sex ritual?
Well, it's possible. I guess I'm a bit more open to that than I was. I mean, I have to say that was just kind of a... I didn't write a whole chapter on that.
Throwing some content, thinking out loud. Yeah, I do that too.
But it's very difficult to know. I mean, there are, you don't see anything firsthand in Gnostic scripture about that stuff, unless you treat the bridal chamber, the Valentinian sacrament of the bridal chamber, as something, involving physical sex. So most of the stuff that you get about it, the stuff that's preserved, is preserved by the church fathers, the heresiologists. The thing is that, a lot of this material was, the kind of thing that they're having orgies and they knock the lamp over so it goes dark, and then they're all humping each other or whatever they're doing. They lift a hand full of semen up to the heavens, all that kind of stuff. Now, it is very sensationalistic, rather, all that kind of stuff. And it's the kind of slander that was also directed at other groups, and I think against, sort of ordinary Christians as well. So it's difficult to tell, whether there's anything real behind that. And it gets a bit like the blood libel about the Jews, in Europe, the slander against the Jews that they kidnap Christian children and use them for human sacrifice. That there are accounts of that all over the place in writings of different countries, but of course it never happened. I'm still, rather ambiguous about the status of, sexual rights and, libertine Gnosticism. But it is possible. I've become much more interested in magic over the last few years, which hadn't been a big part of my sort of worldview before that. So I'm actually seeing how, to what extent magic was involved in ancient Gnosticism, and how magic and religion are very much intertwined, and how the ancient Gnostics, had much in common with the kind of ancient magic that you find in the Greek magical papyri and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of that has opened up for me since I first wrote the Gnostics, which has been republished as Secret History of the Gnostics.
Yeah, we can get that to in a second. And yes, it's nice to see at least scholarship starting to be more open to that instead of just slamming the door to it. And what about the term Gnosticism? You've been part of these great debates that we've had, and obviously I've addressed these debates before with certain guests and so forth. Where do you stand with the term Gnosticism? Does it work for you? Do you think we should keep it, Andrew? Where's it at?
I think we should keep it, but I'm not an academic scholar. I don't need things to be clearly defined in a way that my colleagues will agree agree with me. So I found the whole deconstruction of the idea of Gnosticism interesting. I also find David Brake's work where now after the deconstruction of Gnosticism, he's reviving the Gnostics as a particular group, as the Sethian group, and he thinks that Gnostic was used as a self-designation by the Sethians, and that's reflected in like Irenaeus's writings about them. Now the problem, that has a problem too, because we don't actually see them calling themselves Gnostics in any of their own writings. It's only in the Church Fathers that they get called Gnostics. And there are obviously links between the Sethians and the Valentinians and with other groups. I'm fine as a somewhat scholarly esotericist, I suppose, in the 21st century, looking back at things that look somewhat similar to me over the ages and saying that these things can be called Gnosticism. And I think several years ago I wrote that I see the Gnostic groups more as a kind of network, with nodes connected to each other. Each group shares something with its neighbors, but they don't necessarily tick 10 boxes of specifying the doctrine that they believe in. So I'm happy with a kind of loose definition of Gnosticism as somebody who's interested in them for not just for historical research, but in terms of what we can understand from their own sort of spirituality and how they can be meaningful to us today.
Yeah, and certainly I should have mentioned, but yeah, Dylan Burns' last book puts a very good case on keeping the term, and he certainly adds to David Brackey. So it's a good dialogue, like the Gnostics being libertine that has been done instead of just shutting the doors.
Yes, I think April DeConnick has been quite sympathetic to that as well.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to her new book. So let's talk about, again, your other work that you mentioned, The Secret History of the Gnostics. That is not actually a new book, is it? It's a second edition.
That's right. It's a second edition of the Gnostics. I can never remember the subtitles, but History, Traditions, Scriptures, Influence, or whatever. So so the paperback edition went out of print, and it was only available as an ebook. So I've contacted Watkins, and then who are the publisher, and they agreed to put out a second edition of it, and also they commissioned the book about the Cathars. It's mostly intact. I think there was some, just in a couple of places, there are tiny number of corrections that I made to the text, and initially they didn't want to have to retypeset the whole thing, so I added material at the front and at the back. I added a preface where I discussed some of the latest Gnostic influenced movies and that kind of thing, and an afterword as well. And also one of the sort of criticisms I had with the original book was that it was quite light on endnotes, so I went and added several extra endnotes. And then we have a foreword by Monty Oxymoron, who's a keyboard player with the punk group The Damned. So his father was actually a historian, and Monty is very interested in Gnosticism, and he's a bright guy, so he went and wrote a foreword for me.
Like I told you, I keep a copy of the Gnostics in my bookshelf right next to me, so I definitely reference it a lot. So definitely looking forward to the second edition. It's, again, a great book, and Andrew always goes to places that others miss and others should find. And why don't we talk now about the lost teachings of the Cathars? Why did you decide to write this?
Well, it's almost becoming a cliche that I write the books that I would have wanted to read when I was doing the research myself.
Right.
So the Cathars are very interesting to me. And a couple of summers ago, Tessa and I went to the Languedoc, and we got to see some of the ruined castles and the citadel of Carcassonne and places like that. So there were several subjects about the Cathars that interested me and that I wanted to follow up and write about. And so this book is basically, it serves as an introduction to the Cathars as well, but particularly focuses on the things that interest me about them. And, there are loads and loads of books about the Cathars, but most of them focus on the Albigensian Crusade and, the wars and the Inquisition. And there's some really good introductions. Sean Martin wrote a nice, and he actually wrote the foreword for this book as well. But he wrote a book about the Cathars for the Pocket Essential series initially, and it's been republished in a couple of different formats. And that's a very good short introduction to the history of the Cathars. Or A Perfect Heresy by Stephen O'Shea that's a very engaging look at the Cathars for a general audience. And there are loads of scholarly books, again, focusing mostly on the Albigensian Crusade. But very few of these books go into the beliefs, the teachings, the practices of the Cathars in any depth. So I discovered that if I was going to be able to tell the story of their teachings, I had to tell the story of their history as well, which I have to say I did find it quite tricky. I'm much more engaged with smaller scale history, with biography and with quite specific eras and events. Getting to grips with the political situation in Europe and the development of the Crusade and all that kind of stuff, I found quite a challenge. And hopefully I managed to not leave it as a kind of a dry military history, but I found plenty of kind of quirky little events and people to discuss while I'm getting the reader up to speed on the history. So I look at their teachings, and I was particularly interested in why are their teachings, why are they considered a form of Gnosticism, and what the Cathars have a myth. What is the myth? How do we find out about that? They believed in reincarnation, and they had the consolamentum rite and a few other practices and everything. So I actually found that all these things are tied together. The myth explains why the consolamentum takes place, and the consolamentum is part of the social structure of the Cathars and all that. So I found it very interesting to do the research for this and to dig through these heresiological tractates and the bits and pieces of the Inquisition records and all that to find out what they really did believe.
I found it an excellent book. I was certainly engaged and intrigued by your narrative on the history of the Cathars and how you, again, as you said, you tied it in to more or less the Gnostic ethos and what was going on in the surrounding worlds. It was a very good book, and I certainly would put it up there with Sean Martin's book if you really want to get the ethos of the Cathars. But Andrew, I might as well bring this now, and then we can go a bit more into the Cathars themselves. Well, how do you feel about Mark Pegg's argument, who was on this show, about how the Cathars never existed, that they were simply wayward Catholics with their own ideas in a time when there was no real centralized church?
Well, I find it interesting, and there are parallels with the deconstruction of Gnosticism as a meaningful category as well. His book for a general audience on the subject is A Most Holy War, and I have to say I found it a bit irritating that he never actually puts all his reasons for thinking that there weren't any Cathars in one place. So that you won't find an actual coherent argument in that book about why there weren't any Cathars. And he's not the only scholar to be doing this at the moment. R.L. Moore, who is a historian of the Cathars as well, and he wrote a book called The War on Heresy. And again, he thinks that the Cathars weren't a really a substantial movement in a similar way to Mark Gregory Pegg, and he goes so far as in his book to devote 2 pages on the subject. So I don't think anyway. I can describe what I understand of his argument. Which, doesn't seem very complete to me, and there are different aspects of it. One interesting thing is that they didn't call themselves Cathars. They called themselves the good Christians, or the good men and the good women, and that's how they were known locally in the Languedoc in the south of France. And they were called Cathars occasionally by the Catholic heresiologists and that kind of stuff, or these writers of polemical tractates. But they weren't generally called Cathars by their enemies, even at that time. They were called heretics or Albigensians. And in fact, it's only kind of into the 20th century that scholars have been calling them Cathars, because they were more likely to be called Albigensians or Patarines and all these other Cathar-related groups previously. So there's one thing. Okay, so Catharism is a scholarly construct that's part of the idea, that Mark Pegg is bringing up, I think. And another thing is that, he thinks that these were quirky local versions of Catholicism, and that it wasn't really, but the Albigensian Crusade and the Inquisition actually kind of radicalized these people, and it was to some extent made into a movement by the opposition of the Catholic Church to what was going on. And of course, as it was being made into a movement, it was actually being forced out of existence as well. So that's another point. Now, a lot of this actually hinges on an account of the Cathars being a forgery. In the 12th century, before the Albigensian Crusade, there's a story of how because the consolamentum is passed on from one person to another, and if the person at the top of the chain who's initiated all these different people doesn't keep the conditions of being a Cathar perfect, such as not eating meat and not having sex and all those things. So if a person breaks the discipline and the strictures of the Cathar perfect, then everybody down the chain who's received the consolamentum from him no longer has valid consolamentum and is no longer Cathar perfect. So there's a story of how Bogomil from Bulgaria, Papa Nicetas, I think, Father Nicetas, came to the Languedoc to explain that the consolamentum, the chain, the order deriving from the Bogomils was now invalid, and so they had to be reconsoled by him, and he was from a kind of competing group to the original order who'd done it. So this was kind of an important event. It was the biggest sort of conference of Cathars ever, and they reorganized. They actually had bishops, even though it's quite a decentralized movement, and so they reorganized the bishoprics and all that kind of stuff. So he thinks that the document which describes this is a forgery, and it apparently only survives in a 16th century printed book, this account. And R.L. Moore also thinks that it's a forgery as well. Unfortunately, in their books for the general public, neither of them give their reasons for considering it a forgery. And I'm damned if I'm going to hunt down their academic publications.
You're too busy hunting down Jeremy Puma. You don't have time for this.
Well, I can do, but I think they should actually. The problem is in these popular books that they've written, they don't really lay out their ideas for the this very radical rethinking of the Catharism. Okay, so if we assume that that account actually is a forgery. Well, that's kind of an odd thing to do. I would have thought, what the motive would be for that. We still have, Cathars, or Albigensians, or just heretics, whatever they are, who become organized during the Albigensian Crusade and the Inquisition. So it doesn't, absolutely exorcise the Cathars from history if what he's saying is right. But I do find him a bit frustrating. I'm open to all this reinterpretation of the Cathars, but I don't think he really lays things out very coherently.
And Andrew, what about Mark? One of his arguments in our interview was the fact that there's no primary texts. Same argument again leveled against the Gnostics, thousands of years ago or before the Nag Hammadi library. But the Cathars, as you write, had certain books like the Secret Supper and the Book of the Two Principles. Are these, do you think, authentic, or we don't know yet?
Oh, well, the Secret Supper is Bogomil, actually, but it was used by the Cathars, we know that. And the Book of the Two Principles, I think that was written in Italy, actually. That's another thing. I don't think his ideas really account for the Italian Cathars, who, of course, weren't called Cathars. They had all these, they were somewhat schismatic and amongst themselves, and each group, was given different names. But I don't think it really accounts for the Italian Cathars either. But the Book of Two Principles is a bit boring, to be honest. I think you can find excerpts from it in the Gnostic Bible by Barnstone and Mayer. And it's in, I think, a complete translation is in Heresies of the High Middle Ages by Wakefield and Evans. So that survives. And then there is the two versions of the Cathar Rite, the Consolamentum, that survive. And, there are all these different accounts by Catholic theologians and polemicists who are arguing against the Cathars. So I don't know what he makes of that material.
My issue always with the Cathars has always been the idea that they didn't have gnosis. Faith had taken over. And also, as you write, that they rejected the Old Testament while the Gnostics embraced the Old Testament and even found it holy. But the way I see it, and even though it sounds more Marcionite than Gnostic, but there's also an evolution. Things change and so forth. But you also find some very good insights in your book, like the fact that in some of their mythology really echoes directly to the Sethians, like the fact that the devil created the world and he couldn't get humans to move. So God had to grant them, the alien God had to grant them souls. So basically, and this is straight out of Sethian text, isn't it?
It is. I mean, there are a few other little suggestive bits and pieces as well. I mean, when you were saying that just now, I was reminded of the Mandaeans. They also have that story, because I'm working on a book on the Mandaeans at the moment. Well, I mean, and the Cathars, had this notion of, spirit trapped in matter as well. I mean, if you try and trace them back historically, the thread of history is it's the dualist Christian thread rather than the specifically Gnostic thread that would connect them with the ancient Gnostics, like the Sethians and the Valentinians. But, they have this notion of spirit being trapped in matter, and it's the result of, a cosmic, well, not accident, but a cosmic fall with, Satan or Lucifer rebelling against God, which has some resonance with the idea of Sophia. Not that she rebelled necessarily, but, she fell from the spiritual world. Satan or Lucifer took, angels with him from heaven in his rebellion, which is also, part of medieval Catholic mythology too. But Satan created the material world, or formed the material world, and formed humanity, as you were saying. And then there's, the heavenly world is a world of spirit. There's no matter there. So when these spiritual angels get trapped in the material world, they get housed within humans and animals. And so the Cathars really did believe in reincarnation or transmigration. And so these spirits or souls are going from body to body, from life to life, until they meet the good men and the good women, and they become a Cathar perfect, and then they can escape, and the angel spirit goes back to the heavenly world. So, that really is very similar to a lot of what's going on in ancient Gnosticism too.
You also, but you write some good social commentary, which I think is very useful. For example, and I know this is, others have written it, but it's always a good reminder how the Cathars or heretics were forced to wear yellow crosses, which we all know how this evolved, and it certainly is a great lesson where this sort of oppressive thought control came from, didn't it?
Yes, very much so. It's like what happened with Jews in Nazi Germany, really. So, it's a way of introducing, social division and, shaming people for their membership of, another version of Christianity or whatever. That was pretty effective. I remember I think in the Montaillou book, mentioning how one of a Cathar believer who'd had to wear his yellow cross, he became so ashamed of having to wear it that he would sometimes take it off in secret, and leave it on a side of on a fence or something like that.
Sometimes this mythology, I always think of Jan Okuliano's Tree of Gnosis. Sometimes this mythology just spreads with the evolution of human thought. I think there's one section you talk about how the Cathars were accused of kissing the asses of cats. Some people thought that's where they got their name. It always reminds me of South Park when in one episode, spraying, putting the ass of a cat in your face could give you visions. So it's it's funny how this is all tied in the human consciousness.
Yeah, yes, they actually kind of, they turned the tables on that a bit once with a kind of a leading Catholic who died. So I think there was a rumor that as he died, they saw a black cat, which was his soul escaping from him.
Yeah, and again, this is interesting. And of course, we also have to understand the Gnostic sensibility is about deconstructing before you can deconstruct. Like the Cathars, for example, they did not like John the Baptist, while the Mandaeans would disagree. They loved Mary Magdalene, and they kind of broke things or deconstructed things as they saw it.
Yes. Well, I think trying to think why they reject John the Baptist. His baptism was a baptism of water as opposed to the baptism of spirit that the Consolamentum represented. They were great levels of the Gospel of John, actually, the Cathars. John the Baptist is very much, his importance is very diminished in the Gospel of John. He's really there as the forerunner to, if Jesus would allow him to untie his shoelaces, then he'd be ever so grateful, And Mary Magdalene was very interesting as well. That crops up in the Holy Blood, Holy Grail stuff, and a lot of that alternative history. So I was surprised to find that they actually did have a tradition of connection with Mary Magdalene, and how widespread that was among Cathars, I don't know, because it was quite decentralized. And you'd often have a Cathar perfect with a group of believers, basically the lay people around him. And, there wasn't much of a focus on doctrinal purity or whatever. So it might, the story that we have about Jesus and Mary Magdalene, might just be one quirky version that got preserved, but it connects with these other traditions in the south of France to do with Mary Magdalene, one version of which is preserved in the Golden Legend, and also, it's kind of an oddity, but this story that God had a wife or two wives, which is kind of an odd thing to be preserved, about the Cathars, because the Cathar perfect were celibate, and even the Cathar believers didn't have to get married at all. There were, no restrictions on them really until they became perfect. So I was very interested to research all that kind of stuff, and also the question of where the Cathars come from, and these various theories of how they might have, survived the Inquisition, and theories that the Tower of Marseille has Cathar imagery in it, or that watermarks in paper made in Europe over hundreds of years shows evidence of Cathar symbols, or that Hieronymus Bosch was a Cathar.
Yes, I love that. I saw that. That was great. But as far as we know, they really didn't survive much after the Inquisition, which of course should be mentioned 1,000 times, was created to exterminate them.
It really was, yes. And, something new it brought. It was the first time, at least in Europe, certainly, that they had this developed bureaucracy in connection with the persecution, this kind of heresy. So the techniques that the inquisitors used were invented specifically for what was going on with the Cathars, and it was this kind of divide and conquer approach again. They would interview, they'd go, a few inquisitors, and with their henchmen, would go to a village. They'd start interviewing people, and the interviews would be transcribed by a scribe, or I guess translated as well. I think almost all of it's in Latin, so as far as I know. And then they go and cross-reference the names. They'd ask an old lady who they might have seen greeting the Cathars, because the only discipline that the Cathar believers had to stick to was the melioramentum, which was a greeting to the Cathars, to the Cathar perfect. So, an old lady would be asked if she'd seen such and such person making the melioramentum to a perfect, and then somebody else would be asked the same question, and then all this stuff would be cross-referenced, and so that they could try and work out who was at the root of the Cathar influence on a particular village, or in a particular, or in another location. So those techniques, they were used by the Stasi and the KGB and all these other instruments of totalitarian states and other secret police organizations around the world. And of course, the Inquisition it went far beyond the Languedoc. And in Spain, it was, notorious for the persecution of Jews in Spain. And, it finally, the office of the Inquisition ended in the 19th century. But I think there's its successor was something like the Office of Doctrinal Purity, something like that. And the last pope, the one who retired, Pope Emeritus, he was actually at the head of that organization, which was a successor to the Inquisition. Like I said, I'm not all that interested in the large-scale history, and I refer to that essay by P.D. Uspensky in A New Order of the Universe, Esotericism and History, in which he talks about the history of crime. The history that we know, the history that gets taught in schools is the history of crime. It's the history of wars and, persecution and all that kind of stuff. But there's another history going on beside it that's largely unknown. So I was more interested in this other history, the history of esotericism, or literally inner religion, whatever you want to call it, that is what the Cathars were really about, and is what is important to them. And most of the books about them focus on the history of crime.
I like how you bring up, I believe it's Gurdjieff's law of octaves, and how a good idea can sort of evolve into something terrible, and it seems to happen over and over again.
Yes, and he specifically used the Inquisition as an example. You know, you have a religion that's meant to be based on love. You know, love thy neighbor as thyself, and you know, through a series of deviations at important points where you know, what Gurdjieff called intervals, it starts going off at a kind of tangent in a slightly different direction, and does that so many times, you know, until you get to the Inquisition, you know.
Yeah, and here we are, and yeah, it's still going on in many parts of the world, different manifestations. So, Andrew, to end, what are you working on next? I think you mentioned you're working on a book on the Mandaeans, speaking of persecution.
Yes, sure. Yes, it's probably called John the Baptist and the Last Gnostics, The Secret History of the Mandaeans. And my take on the Mandaeans in this book is I'm looking at their history and tracing the history back to John the Baptist, you know, if I can. So it's interesting to touch on you know, they emerge into Western history at various periods. You know, of course, in the 20th century, the English scholar Lady Drower had a lot of contact with the Mandaeans, and was very influential in getting the texts translated. And also, you know, Joran Buckley and other scholars at the moment are doing similar things. And then in the 19th century, you have the Mandaeans very nearly died out as a religion because of a cholera epidemic in Iraq. And there was, in fact, one priest who, with his cousin, they managed to kind of initiate each other to keep the religion going. So, you know, it's like a series of catastrophes in many ways. And you get an encounter with the Jesuits. And then I look into some of the ideas about contact with the Templars, the Knights Templars. You know, that's something that's been was knocked around in a few books. And I enjoy doing that. I mean, I do a similar thing in the Cathars book. I love these, you know, wild ideas, you know, whether you could want to call them conspiracy theories or not, or alternative history. But, you know, it has to be said that often the kind of factual or historical basis for them is very slight, or even, you know, completely wrong in many cases. I find them fascinating, and so, you know, my approach to them is I treat them sympathetically, but, you know, if something turns out not to be factually true as far as we can see, you know, I say so, you know. So I do that with this chapter in about the links between the Templars and the Mandaeans and that kind of thing. And also, you know, and I look towards their connection or lack of connection with the Sabians of Haran in northern Iraq, who managed to get adopted as people of the book as well. The sacred scripture that they showed to Muslims in Iraq to show that they could qualify as people of the book who worshipped a single god were the Hermetica. So you have this very odd situation of you know, an ancient city having these survival of these planetary gods who you know, had their own temples, and they had the Hermetica, and they managed to qualify as people of the book and not have to convert to Islam. And so there have been some questions of whether they have a connection with the Mandaeans or not, because Haran is a important location in some of the Mandaeans' own scriptures, and they have traditions that they were in the north of Iraq earlier rather than in the marshy south. To a tiny extent, they still survive now. And then go back, you know, look at their connections with Islam, and further back, to the aspects of Babylonian religion that might be preserved, like the names of the planetary entities in Mandaean writings are the Babylonian names, and then to see whether they come from Palestine, ancient Palestine, as they say, and that they left when they fled Jerusalem, and that was being destroyed, and that whether they go back to John the Baptist. And you can see there are all these intriguing connections. I mean, the Manichaeans had an encounter with the Mandaeans because the Manichaeans adapted some of the Mandaean hymns for their own purposes. There are resemblances between the Mandaeans and their weekly baptisms, many other first century baptismal sects, and to the Essenes as well. So I look into all of that, and then even beyond to, because the Mandaeans don't say that they originated with John the Baptist. They say that they originated with Adam. So Adam was a... So I'm really enjoying going through all this material, and I've had to extend my deadline a little already, and it's mid-December now, so I've really got to get my act together, get all that finished. And as much as I'm enjoying it, I'd also like to move on to pastures new too. And I've also been writing for New Dawn magazine, which is an Australian magazine which has a kind of wide range of material, everything from conspiracy theory to alternative medicine to esoterica. I think Richard Smoley has written for it as well. So I did an article on J.G. Bennett, who was a pupil of Gurdjieff and a brilliant man himself. And I did a long 2-part article called Eon and Epoch, which I might expand into a whole book at some point, which is about all the various ideas of cosmic cycles and religious epochs and epochs of civilization, all that kind of thing. Looking at the esoteric and religious ideas in contrast to the sort of scientific ideas, like what actually inspired me was this concept of the Anthropocene era. Certain scientists have been trying to promote the idea that the influence of humanity on the Earth is so widespread that it actually constitutes a new geological era. It's affected the geology of the Earth to that extent, and it's partly an attempt, to try and bring awareness of that to people, and partly, a genuine feeling that we have entered a new geological era from the first atom bomb being exploded, as the radiation traces leave their evidence in the strata in an unmistakable way. So that, those are scientific ideas are all very interesting and all evidence based. But there's no, even though it's the Anthropocene era supposedly, there's no place for humanity in the scientific vision. In esotericism, humanity has a special role on the Earth. And in Gnosticism, humans are the only beings really who can be redeemed or can achieve gnosis. So in most religious and esoteric schemes, humanity has a special place, but in science it doesn't really. So I'm, in these articles, the second part came out this month. I have a real whirlwind tour of the various ideas, everything from astrological cycles and the golden age, all the yugas, all these things, down to the Crowley's thelemic aeon and chaos magic and Jung and all that kind of stuff.
Wow, well, we certainly look forward to your contributions, and we certainly hope that editor Damon Andrew Phillip Smith can get writer Eidolon Andrew Phillip Smith to crank out some more of that stuff. So we look forward to it, but I think that's all the time we have today. Andrew, I'd like to thank you very much for coming once again on the show and discussing the Gnostic Six, the secret history of the Gnostics, and the lost teachings of the Cathars.
Well, thank you for inviting me.